The front door banged against the wall so hard that the picture frames rattled. I set down the basket of folded laundry just as Marcus's voice thundered through the house. His footsteps pounded across the hardwood floor, fast and heavy, carrying a rage that felt foreign in my quiet home. "Mom, what did you do?" he shouted. His face flushed red, green eyes flashing like they had when he was a teenager caught in a storm of his own temper. "Chloe just called me in tears. You changed the password on your card." She was humiliated at the store, standing there with a cart full of groceries she couldn't pay for. Everyone was staring. I stayed in the doorway of the living room, bracing myself. "Marcus, I changed it because it's my card, my money. I'm not obligated to leave it open for anyone to use." He threw his hands in the air. "We're family. You can't just block us like that." Chloe was buying necessities, food, cleaning supplies. "You made her look like a fool." The words stung, not because of what he said, but because of the contempt behind them. For 42 years, I had carried him, raised him, sacrificed for him. Now he stood in front of me, fists clenched, as if I were some stranger keeping him from what he believed was his right. I took a deep breath and steadied my voice. "Marcus, lower your tone. We're educated people. If you need help, we can talk. But my card is not a family service." His jaw tightened, and he took 2 steps closer, close enough for me to see the sweat at his hairline. For the first time, a knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Not fear of harm, but fear of the distance that had grown between us. A distance wide enough to make my only son look like a stranger. The laundry basket still sat in the hall, but I no longer cared about shirts and linens. The fight that had begun in a grocery store was now rooted in my living room, and it was only the beginning. I steadied myself, though my knees felt weak, and looked him straight in the eye. "Marcus, do you remember how I worked nights at Memorial Hospital after your father passed? I took every extra shift so you could stay in school. I paid your tuition when the scholarships ran out. I gave you the down payment for your condo when you wanted a place of your own. Everything I had went to make sure you could stand on your own feet." He folded his arms across his chest, unmoved. "That was your duty as a mother. You're acting like you did me a favor. Parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children." The words landed sharper than any accusation. Duty, as if years of exhaustion, of missed meals and aching joints, had been nothing more than a line in a contract I had signed by giving birth to him. My chest ached with the memory of those nights coming home at dawn, slipping off my shoes quietly so I wouldn't wake him, believing every hour I gave was building his future. "Marcus," I said softly, "I did it because I loved you, because I wanted you to have the life your father and I dreamed for you." He shook his head. "Then why are you turning against us now? Chloe is family. Her needs are our needs. You've always been generous. Why change now?" I searched his face for some trace of the boy I had raised. But I found only the hardened lines of a man who saw me not as a mother, but as a vault that had suddenly closed. The son I once carried in my arms now carried expectations that stripped me of dignity. And his voice only grew sharper. I remember the first evening Marcus brought Chloe to my home. He was grinning in a way I hadn't seen since his college years. That boyish excitement lit up his face as he held her hand. Chloe walked in with perfect poise, her nails immaculate, her hair styled to frame her delicate features. She carried herself as though she belonged in every room she entered. I served them my baked mac and cheese, the dish Marcus always requested, and Chloe praised it generously, insisting she'd never tasted anything like it. Her laughter was light, her smile warm, and in that moment, I let myself believe she might become the daughter I never had. The early days were filled with small requests. So small they seemed harmless. "We're a little short this month, Sylvia," Chloe would say sweetly, glancing at Marcus as though embarrassed. "Could you lend us $200? We'll pay you back Friday." Friday always came, but repayment never did. Soon $200 became $500 and then $800, each excuse polished with just enough sincerity to keep me quiet. When Chloe asked for my card just for a day to buy medicine for her mother, I handed it over without hesitation. That night, I checked my statement. There was indeed a pharmacy charge, but there was also a receipt from a boutique on Broughton Street, $250 in clothes, and another for dinner at one of Savannah's finer restaurants. I stared at the screen, torn between anger and disbelief. I didn't confront her. Instead, I folded the evidence into silence, telling myself it was a mistake, that she was young, that maybe Marcus hadn't known. The pattern repeated again and again, each emergency accompanied by charges that spoke of luxuries, not survival. The silence I kept became its own kind of prison, a fragile attempt to preserve peace that only allowed the cracks to deepen. And by the time I recognized the danger of my own restraint, it had already become their expectation. After the call from the bank about the blocked charge, I went straight to the lockbox I kept in my bedroom closet. Inside were the documents of my life: deeds, insurance policies, Robert's will. I pushed the folders aside, searching for reassurance that everything was still safe. My hands stilled when I saw a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath my passport. I unfolded it and felt the air leave my chest. It was a photocopy of my credit card front and back, even a security code at the bottom in a looping hand I recognized too well, written for emergencies.
See?
My fingers trembled as I held it. The proof I had been dreading. Chloe hadn't just borrowed my card. She had made herself a permanent key to my savings. When I confronted Marcus, his reaction sliced deeper than the discovery itself. "Mom, you're imagining things. Chloe would never do that." I showed him the copy. "Her handwriting is right here. Marcus, look." He glanced at it once and pushed it back toward me. "You're being paranoid. You've been forgetting things lately. Maybe you're not keeping track of what you give us." The words struck like a blow. Paranoid. Forgetful. He wasn't just defending her. He was casting doubt on my mind, my ability, my worth. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I know what I've seen. I know what I've lived." But he only shook his head, his expression a mixture of pity and irritation. "Maybe it's time someone else helped you manage things." It was then I understood. My own son didn't see me as capable anymore. He saw me as a liability standing in the way of his wife's ambitions. And the ground between us shifted into something I no longer recognized. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. This time, Marcus and Chloe stood on my porch with carefully arranged smiles, as if the shouting and accusations had never happened. They came in speaking gently, almost tenderly, their voices coated in honey. "Mom," Marcus began, settling into the armchair across from me. "We've been thinking. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if we just set up a system. No more confusion. No more arguments." Chloe leaned forward, her hands clasped like she was making a generous offer. "Exactly. We don't want to burden you by asking all the time. If you gave us a fixed amount every month, say $1,500, we'd know what we could count on. That way, you wouldn't feel invaded, and we wouldn't feel embarrassed." Her words dripped with reason, but I heard only entitlement. $1,500 a month was nearly my entire Social Security check. I shook my head slowly. "No, I can't, and I won't agree to that." The mask of patience slipped. Marcus's jaw clenched. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. Chloe and I are building a future, and you're making it harder. If you don't want to help us, maybe the court should decide if you're capable of handling your own money." I froze. "What are you saying?" He didn't flinch. "Guardianship. If you can't manage, the law allows family to step in. It would protect you from mistakes." The boy I had raised, the one I had nursed through fevers, cheered through exams, and sacrificed everything for, was now threatening to strip away the very independence I had fought my whole life to keep. I felt my voice tremble, but I forced it steady. "Get out of my house." They left without slamming the door, but the silence they left behind pressed heavier than any echo of anger, and I knew I could no longer face this battle alone. That night, I sat in the kitchen staring at my cold cup of tea. The words guardianship echoed until I thought they might crush me. I had endured sleepless nights before when Robert was sick, when Marcus was young. But this was different. This was a battle I could not fight alone. The next morning, I found myself knocking on Alma Green's door. She had lived across the street for 15 years, a retired teacher with a sharp mind and a steady way about her. When she opened the door, one look at my face was enough. "Come in," she said softly. I poured out everything. The card, the copy in Chloe's handwriting, the threats of guardianship. Alma listened without interruption. Her lips pressed into a thin line. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Sylvia, I've watched Chloe since the beginning. I've seen her sweet face at your table and her sharp eyes when she thought no one noticed. You're not imagining this. She's been grooming Marcus for years, and now they're coming for you." Her certainty steadied me. "But what can I do?" I whispered. "You fight," Alma said firmly. "And you don't fight alone. I know someone, Vincent Hale. He's an attorney downtown who specializes in cases like this. You need him." 2 days later, I sat in Vincent's office, surrounded by stacks of files. He listened carefully, asked precise questions, and then requested my bank statements. Within a week, his findings came back: $25,000 drained from my savings and $15,000 in credit card debt opened under my name, accounts I had never seen. The numbers were undeniable. My silence had been turned into their weapon, and now the truth was spread out in black and white across Vincent's desk. The morning of the hearing, Elma rode with me downtown. The old stone facade of the Chatham County Courthouse seemed heavier than the humid air pressing against Savannah. My hands shook as I clutched the file Vincent had prepared, though he carried his own thick binder of evidence. I told myself to breathe, that I had nothing to hide. But the thought of facing Marcus in that room nearly broke me. Inside the courtroom, Marcus and Chloe sat with their young lawyer, whispering furiously. Chloe's eyes met mine briefly, cool and steady, before she looked away. Marcus never looked up. I sat beside Vincent, my heart beating loud enough to drown the hum of shuffling papers. When it began, their lawyer painted me as paranoid, confused, unable to keep track of my own accounts. Marcus took the stand, speaking with practiced sorrow. "She's not the mother I grew up with," he said. "She forgets things, accuses us of theft. We're only trying to help." Chloe dabbed her eyes with a tissue, nodding at his every word. Vincent rose calmly. He presented bank statements showing charges I could never have made. He produced documentation of 3 credit accounts opened in my name, all sent to Marcus's address. He displayed photographs of the photocopy I had found in my lockbox, Chloe's handwriting clear. Finally, he called my doctor, who testified that my mental and neurological exams were normal for my age, with no sign of decline. The judge leafed through the evidence, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until I could barely breathe. Then his voice cut through. "This court finds Mrs. Harrington fully competent. The guardianship petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, restitution of $25,000 is ordered with repayment schedules established. The fraudulent accounts are canceled and removed from her credit record. A restraining order is issued, prohibiting direct contact for 1 year." The word should have lifted me, but my eyes went to Marcus. He kept his gaze fixed on the table, his shoulders rigid. Not once did he turn toward me. When it was over, Elma squeezed my hand, and Vincent nodded with quiet satisfaction. I had won. My money, my dignity, my independence were safe. Yet, as I walked out into the Savannah sunlight, the weight in my chest told me I had lost something I could never replace. The day after court, I returned home with papers that declared me victorious. Yet I felt no triumph. I carried them into the house and set them on the dining table. Beside the vase of fresh elas I had cut that morning, the garden glowed in the soft Savannah sun, blossoms nodding gently as though the world had kept on turning without noticing the fracture in my life. I took up the hose and watered the beds, the familiar rhythm soothing my hands, if not my heart. The restraining order gave me protection, but it could not fill the emptiness. For years, I had pictured Sunday dinners in this house. Marcus at the head of the table, Chloe bringing a dish, perhaps even children one day filling the rooms with laughter. Instead, the silence pressed against me, thicker than the humid air. Meals became a solitary ritual. I cooked smaller portions, set one plate instead of three, and tried not to glance at the vacant chairs. I ate in silence, listening to the faint tick of the clock on the wall, a reminder of hours passing without conversation. At night, I sat in my armchair, the same chair where I once cradled Marcus as an infant, and stared at the phone that no longer rang. Independence had been won, but it came at the cost of companionship. The freedom I had fought so hard to keep now felt like a cage of my own making, its bars forged from betrayal and loss. Yet, even as the quiet closed in, a part of me refused to surrender. Something told me the story of my life wasn't finished, and the garden would not be the only thing to bloom again. At first, Vincent came only out of duty. He wanted to ensure the repayment order was being followed, to update me on the legal process, and to check that Marcus and Chloe had respected the restraining order. He carried a briefcase and spoke in the precise language of the courtroom, always calm and measured. But after each visit, he lingered just a little longer, and I found myself putting on a pot of coffee before he even knocked. Soon our conversations stretched beyond paperwork. He asked about the garden, about Robert, about the years I had spent at Memorial Hospital. In return, he told me about his wife, gone 5 years now, and about the grown children who lived scattered across the country. We discovered a shared love of books. He leaned toward history, I toward novels, and we traded recommendations like school children comparing treasures. One afternoon, while I served pecan pie on the back porch, Vincent pointed toward the Spanish moss draping the oaks beyond my fence. He spoke of the city's history, of how Savannah had endured fires, wars, hurricanes, and still stood proud. Resilience is woven into this place, he said. His words struck something in me, because I realized resilience was woven into me too. The house, once so heavy with silence, began to feel warm again. Laughter crept back into the rooms. Not the laughter I had dreamed of from Marcus and grandchildren, but laughter all the same. Vincent's presence softened the edges of my loneliness. He never treated me like a burden, never hinted at what I owed him. He valued my company, and that was something I hadn't felt in years. Little by little, I allowed myself to trust him, not as a lawyer, not as a savior, but as a man who saw me as more than my money or my mistakes. And in that trust, something long buried began to stir, a fragile hope that life still held space for joy. The months that followed were steady, like the tide smoothing rough sand after a storm. Vincent continued to visit, not with files or legal updates anymore, but with a smile and fresh stories from his day. Alma, ever loyal, teased us both about how obvious it was becoming. By the time spring came, the decision felt natural, as though life itself had been nudging me toward it. We were married on a mild April afternoon beneath the oaks in my own backyard. Alma stood as my witness, her hands clasped in quiet pride, while Vincent's brother traveled from Charleston to stand for him. There was no music but the birdsong, no gown but the soft blue dress I had owned for years, and no extravagance but the flowers I had tended myself, geraniums and roses blooming as if in blessing. As we exchanged vows, I felt the weight of the past lift piece by piece. I had lost nearly $40,000, drained not just from my savings but from my heart, and with it, I had lost my only son to his own greed. That grief would never vanish, but it no longer defined me. What remained was my dignity, intact despite the battles, and a love that asked for nothing but my companionship in return. Our home together became a place of laughter, of books stacked on the table, of evenings spent in the garden with coffee as the sun fell low. It was not the life I had once imagined, but it was mine, and it was enough.